Hi, I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc. Today on Decoding the Conflict Mindset, I am so excited to bring to you attorney, mediator, international businessman, Richard Lutringer. Richard has a fascinating background, having worked around the world, and still actively practices in both the states of New York and California. What Richard brings to us is keen insight from those many years of experience working with the law, mediating cases, but particularly in family-owned businesses. The uniquenesses, the challenges, the dynamics of family, working with family, and in all different layers of business. The cousins, the uncles, the siblings, the parents, the grandparents, very intermeshed. But he gives guidance as to how to navigate through that and what to do about it. So must listen today. Come and join us. You won't want to miss out on Richard. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Debra. It's such a delight to be here. I've looked forward to this for quite a while.
Well, I'm so excited. Thank you, Richard, to have you, particularly given your specialty in family business disputes. And I know that you come from a long record of work experience. So let me tell our viewers a little bit about your background so they can better appreciate the insights and the knowledge that you're going to bring to our podcast today. And so, Richard, you're currently a resident of Palm Desert, and you're active in it was a board of desert coalitions, so an environmentalist at heart, right?
Very much so, yes.
That's great. That's great. And some other things about Richard, he has actually had a long time experience as a partner in an international law firm specializing in mergers and acquisitions. I'm particularly curious about this one, Richard. You've been a judge every year in Paris for the international competition. Tell me more.
Well, it's the International Chamber of Commerce. They have a arbitration. They're famous for their arbitration, but they also have a mediation wing. And every year they have a competition, and it's open to law schools from around the world. And generally, there are maybe 3 or 4 from the States, but 30 or more from places like China or India or Hungary, Poland, Russia. And these students come, and for a week, they mediate role plays, which have been drafted. I've drafted some of them. And then they're awarded points on how well they do that, how well they use the techniques of mediation, like listening, like reframing, like getting information from the other side, and giving information that could be helpful. And all these things which we've learned as mediators, they are asked to do that in this situation. And anyway, so unfortunately it's in Paris, but somebody has to do it, right?
Well, I was just going to say, gosh, Richard, maybe, a payback might be inviting me with you to Paris next time, right? I've got to get part of that gig.
You'd be a great judge. I know you would be, yeah.
Well, I have to admit, when I taught at California Western School of Law, I did do a lot of judging for their negotiation and mediation and absolutely loved it. And periodically, they'll still call me up, even though I haven't taught there for a few years. But I'll have to talk to you about that offline so we can see what we can work out. Well, very good. Well, I found that was very interesting about your background. But I also want to just let our viewers know that you are nationally recognized, and sounds like even internationally recognized, as an expert on the peaceful resolution of family and family business disputes. And you've been quoted even in the New York Times with respect to using mediation techniques to resolving disputes from family vacation homes. Wow, that's certainly probably an area of interest too. And I know one thing that you have recently taken on is that you're now on the board of directors for the MC3 training program. And so maybe share with our viewers a little bit about that.
Well, MC3 doesn't do training. What it does, it qualifies and certifies mediators who have had training at recognized places, and they've also done had experience either outside of courts or in courts and so on. So they have both experience and background. And then the certification process vets that to make sure it's all correct, and then gives the certification to the mediator. There's really nothing like it in the States that will allow a person who's not a lawyer, for instance, to get something equivalent to a bar. I mean, many laymen think, oh, a member of the bar could mediate. Well, actually, you and I know that's not necessarily the case. But if you don't have either one, if you don't have a bar membership, there really was no other way to indicate your ability in mediation. And this was designed for that. And it's just growing, getting started. And we're looking to connect with mediators all over the country. Right now, it's mainly California located, but it will be all over soon.
Well, that is exciting because I know the field has long struggled with certification or credentialing or whatever it's called. And so this is a very exciting step and just newly launched this past year, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, great. Well, I'm certainly going to get the word out on that more too. So, yeah. So one other interesting thing, Richard, I find about your background is that you continue to maintain offices both in California and New York City. And so I see you've been active in the New York dispute resolution arena as well. So say a little bit more about that.
Well, I cut my teeth in mediation in the community centers in New York City. And there's such a microcosm of the entire world there that I would often have be mediating a dispute between a landlord who speaks no English, only Spanish, and a tenant who speaks only Chinese, no English. And mediating their dispute was challenging, but I had translators from both sides. And so that's how, I mean, that wasn't a very typical case, but it was not untypical. And so then I began doing mediation commercially, little by little, until I became admitted as a mediator to various courts and also to the CPR, to AAA, and a few other places like that, Cedar, so that I am sort of qualified by them for mediations too. So it's, but I still maintain an office in New York. Now, I will not say that over the last year, I've spent a lot of time in that office because of COVID. And in fact, I think many of the mediations I've done, they don't even know I'm out here in lovely California, and because it's just a room. Mm-hmm. So I do mediate in New York still, and I mediate here. And I'd make no secret of the fact that I'm here, but it doesn't really affect my ability to mediate. I mean, I love the face-to-face contact, but when I realized that many of the mediations I did in New York, people were coming from Cleveland, Chicago, Boston, sometimes overseas, and have to arrange all those schedules, all those hotels, all those meals, all those days. And now they can just turn on their computer and participate. It's mind-boggling.
It is. I think that's been one of the surprising outcomes of this last pandemic year, is that we have learned that mediation can be done very successfully online, and in many instances even easier to manage, not just for the travel and all those kinds of things, but just even the emotional content in the mediation, and so an interesting thing to explore. In fact, there's a whole lot of things developing around that arena too. So, yeah. So I know the one other thing before we dive into some more of our content, because I see that one of your articles is called Mediation on Broadway, the Dramatic Lessons of Oslo, and published on mediate.com in June of 2017. So say more about that.
Well, the play that won the Best Play Award, the New York Drama Critics in 1917, was Oslo. And it's the backstory to the negotiations of the, I think it was the Carter or I forget whether it was the Carter or Clinton negotiation. I think it was Clinton. And but this was all the preparation for it, getting the both sides together secretly in Oslo. Not the higher ups, the presidents and so on, but the next level down, because neither one could afford politically to be seen meeting with the other side. So it had been done in a very confidential way, had them arrive in ways which, different airports and so on. And the reason I wrote about it was, even though it wasn't touted as a mediation story, the two organizers, which were a husband and wife who were both in the State Department of Norway, basically arranged the meetings in such a way that they were like mediators. They listened to the other side. They created places for listening and reframing and all of those things which mediators do, which are the oil which motivates and facilitates a negotiation. And so I was spellbound when I watched it, because I saw these, I won't call them tricks, techniques being used on stage, and nobody really knew about it. I mean, as a mediator, I knew what was happening. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I wrote up about how those different techniques were used in the play, and still it was a dramatic success for other people too, not just mediators.
Well, you elaborated on something that I will frequently say, is that as mediators, we are trained in a series of communication strategies and techniques and things to do that are very effective, and yet we know that anybody can learn them, and how much their communication will improve if they had their hands on a few of these techniques, right?
Well, we call them techniques, but I think it's been done for centuries, and people like Gandhi, when he was a lawyer, his first reaction when he got a case was, how can I settle this case? And he would call the other side up, and it didn't seem to matter ethically. He'd call up the party of the other side and get people together and get them to do things which we do to try to find common interest, to look for the higher level of values which they both share, and then have them negotiate. So I don't think there's any secret to what we do. I think what's the secret is that since the book by Fisher and Urey, Getting to Yes, there's been a kind of a technique and a process which we've learned, and probably that is effective because we wouldn't come to it naturally. And now it's, of course, second nature to all of us.
Right. So, in that regard, we've been talking a little bit more broadly about disputes and conflict and things like that, but your particular area of expertise is around family businesses. And again, you have an extensive background that supports all of that. So what is it about disputes in family-owned businesses? How does that differ from maybe business disputes, generally speaking?
What a wonderful question. It's like two cultures coming together. The culture of family, which wants to nurture the children. The parents take care of the children, want the children to do whatever they can to be happy in life. And then the business, which is in a competitive world. So you have a whole different structure there based on principles of ability, competition, not on age or how much mom likes you and all those other things. When you put a family business together, you often have overlapping structures. And that's the ones that I see very often are inherited businesses where the parents had built up a small family business. It could even be a medium-sized business. And when they retire or move on or die, they give it in equal shares to the children, who suddenly are now the owners of the business. And the parents are no longer there to solve disputes or to make things right or to do things. They have to do it themselves. And it creates a lot of friction because they're not used to that. And the older brother, who was used to being the heavyweight in the family, he may be in sales somewhere, whereas the younger daughter is now the CEO. Now, just imagine that situation, that you have to work for your younger daughter. I mean, it often doesn't work, simply because the past structures are so ingrained that it's difficult to get them to see their sibling in another light. Now, that said, by working as a structure together where it's not so much vertical, but more horizontal, there are ways to do it. And there are many successful families that do that. And usually small businesses are started by one or two people who dedicated their entire lives to the business, worked 24 hours a day, and gave their children a lifestyle which they had never had.
Yeah.
And now the children are running it, but they don't want to work 24 hours a day. And so they have to find a way to succeed without that. And they can. I mean, maybe one has to leave the business. I mean, we can get into that some more, but so there's a difference. I mean, if it were just the business, you could fire people who are performing. Yeah. Can you do that if it's your brother? You know, and so that's the seed of why it's different.
Yeah, certainly working a lot with families and family-owned businesses myself. You know, you get that whole emotional climate in there as family members that we have emotion in the workplace too, but it's different. Like for some of the very same reasons that you just talked about is, you know, maybe my little sister is now my boss, you know, or my big brother it doesn't have a position of authority, and yet I'm used to looking up and listening to him at home, you know. And
Right.
so it really does beg broadening that mindset and being able to sort of be flexible and resilient in these shifting roles and dynamics, right?
Yeah, and there are often there's unspoken things in a family which are never talked about, and some of them could be parent has always favored one child. In other words, that may have never come up, but it may have to be talked about if we're going to make this work. Or a cousin who's always been an outcast, and yet his father is a partner in the business and wants him to come in. And people that are, let's say, they're more shy and retiring, have never really spoken much, and yet they have great ideas. How do you get them to express themselves in the business? I mean, some of this needs coaching as well as mediating. There can also be bullying that's taken place for years, and that's never been spoken about. There can be addictions, you know, whether they're drug or alcohol, which are not talked about. And if these things are left just, you know, what the words I hear more than any other is let's not go there. It's a can of worms. Let's not, I mean, it's too difficult.
Yeah.
And yet, if you don't go there, that can of worms is going to be every time there's a discussion. So at the risk of shaking up the current day, you've got to, and I don't mean dictate to them, I mean just show them the value of being honest and vulnerable, open, talking about their fears of bullying, talking about their fears of domination, or there's a gender issue. The father may have always thought the sons should be in the business and the girls will get married, you know. So is that something which we want to perpetuate? And those discussions can draw a family together closer than they've ever been. It's like in a marriage, if you're able to say, let's talk about it rather than let's put it off, you can end up much stronger afterwards.
Right, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I'm getting ready for another project where I'm working with in collaboration with people who specialize in ultra high net worth, and so again, a lot of those family issues come up in those kinds of arenas as well, in terms of the wealth distribution. And so you used the word vulnerability. And that definitely cropped up in my research around this other area as well, as far as what are some of the current issues and how are they playing themselves out.
Yeah.
And so there is a certain vulnerability to have that more difficult conversation or challenging conversation, but being courageous enough to do that and know that will be okay on the other side if managed well.
Yeah. I mean, the normal family business advisor can be extremely competent in tax issues, in estate planning, and all of these things. But they really have had no training in dealing with high emotions. And not every mediator has either. So, I mean, part of my training was to learn how to deal with that. And they don't know what to do, really, in a family. But my addition to them is to say, let me help you get over this hump where they're trying to decide how to set up the business. You can do all of the tax and legal and everything, but let me help them get to the next stage. And that's really all I want to do. I'm like, maybe you'll bring in a surgeon who is specialized in a certain kind of surgery. And then the GP takes over after that. I'm not really interested primarily. I mean, I've learned how to do it. I could do it, but I'm not as interested in being the full family advisor from cradle to grave. I'm more interested in helping them when there are difficulties.
Yeah. That's an excellent analogy, I think, as far as, bringing in like a surgeon who specializes in something to assist the general practitioner and then step out when the problem's solved. So that's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Like you, I've also partnered with financial advisors and to assist with certain dynamics. And it's an interesting road to go down. So what would you say are some of the typical underlying causes of family disputes? You touched on some things as far as, the siblings may be structured differently within the organization than what they might be in the family unit. What are some other things that might contribute to these unique family disputes?
Well, I think generational differences anyway. I mean, if you look at my parents versus my children, I mean, there's a whole, like 2 generations there. They are so different in their outlook on life. And would be, if I don't have a family business, but I did, I wouldn't expect them to be running it the same way my parents would. So a lot of it is generational. And if the parents are still involved, they may not really recognize that what they see as hesitancy or pushback from their children isn't personal. It's just the way they run their lives now. They want more time to be with the family. They want more things like that. My father's generation didn't value as much. And so those kinds of things, generational are one. Now, if it was a business, it may straighten itself out almost automatically as new people are hired and so on. But in a family, you don't go find new family members if there's going to be a business. So you take them as you got them. So that's one source of difficulty. I think the major thing is that there is this superimposed history of a relationship, which is put onto a business relationship. Mm-hmm. And that has to be, it's almost always different because there's no mother that could easily fire her son, but a mother who owns a business could fire an employee without question. Mm-hmm. So that's the nub of the problem. If you want to have a generational change and the family, a legacy with the family, then you have to work at it from the time the children are young to see that they inherit the values of the business and want to do that and so on. It's not automatic. And so that's probably the key difference is that unlike like a small business with strangers who come together, a family that comes together still has to deal with Thanksgiving, has to deal with Christmas, has to deal with all those things. And that, which is more important? I mean, most people would say Thanksgiving and Christmas are more important than being in business together. So, and sometimes in order to save Thanksgiving and Christmas, you have to decide not to be in business together because it just doesn't work well.
Well, I would think too, also laying some rules of engagement, as I like to call them, about, okay, if we're in business together as a family, then we don't talk business as a family at the Thanksgiving table or the Christmas Eve table.
Oh, that's easy to say.
I know. But it's really easy to flip into shop talk.
Yeah, but the more they're separated, the more that they do different things. And maybe, like, you could be a silent partner. You could have a 10% interest in the family company and be a teacher. And then the dispute will be, well, why is my brother living this high life and I'm getting no dividends, and then that's a discussion to have. Why doesn't he give out more? And yet, if you look at it, you'll see that people at his level in other companies are living the same way. So are you really going to limit your CEO's salary because you think it's fair? Now, maybe you would. Maybe his legacy of the family is such that you'd say, I want my sister to have 10% equivalent to, let's say, $100,000 or something, even though she's not working in the business. But will that when they have children, will they all get paid too? Will they, so that's really the second, there's a rule in family business that 30% will survive into the next generation, 13% to the next generation, and 3% into the next generation. It just basically will not go over that many generations. And although that's seen as sort of a bad thing, it's actually not. It means that they may have sold it to a strategic buyer and have a lot of money now, as opposed to being working in the business. But the business itself just doesn't often survive for 2 or 3 generations.
Yeah, that is pretty sad, isn't it? Yeah, I'm well aware that oftentimes going into that 3rd generation is real tough.
Yeah. I mean, some families like the Walmart, the Waltons, the family that owns Walmart, or several other families like that, they've developed entire societies of cousins who come together once a year to hear about the business and then go home again. But they all get rewarded for having been in that family.
Oh, wow.
So there can be like hundreds of them after 2 or 3 generations. And I know in Europe, it's also the Henkels and people like that. They have their own office of relatives, or whatever it's called, where they give them newsletters and they tell them what's happening and so on. So it can happen, but it's rare.
Well, that sounds like it takes a lot of strategic planning as well as forethought and vision to see how that can go. Yeah.
I represented many German middle-sized companies when I was doing more M&A and advising, and many of them would only allow one sibling or one child to take over the business. Let's say there were 2 brothers in this one case I'm thinking of. They said, well, we each have like 3 children. We each have to choose one to take our place in the business.
Oh.
Because they knew, there was their theory anyway, that once they started dividing that ownership, they'd lose the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that one would have. So they had to reward the others some other way, but that was how they chose to do it.
Well, interesting. I know in one of my more recent family-owned businesses that I was working on, bringing the family members or the children into the business and working in the business, they all came in at the same level of pay. However, they had vastly different experience and education. And so it was like there was resentment that grew from that because, wow, I put all this time in and this other person doesn't, and yet we're getting paid the same. And so one way we dealt with it is doing a salary compensation comparison with other companies of similar size and nature.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent way to do it. Of course, they have 2 roles very often. They're both an owner and an employee.
Yeah.
So, you can understand the democracy of payments to owners because we have 1%, you get 1% of the profits. But it's much harder to do that with employees.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious then, one of the questions that we had talked about was, what can a minority owner do if that minority owner disagrees with the managing sibling? I know what I've done with those situations, but I'm curious to see what you have found to be most successful.
It's very difficult. In 2 cases that I've been consulted, it was by I happened to be the daughters, and where the son was really running the business, and the parents had moved on, and they were no longer involved. And it's very hard. I mean, if you don't have the share power, if you only have the family power, you have to use the family card. and saying this isn't fair and this isn't what Dad would have wanted and all that. But I would say the way to prevent that or to have that happen is to have a shareholder agreement or some type of a constitution of the family so that there is voice. You know, what they found is that if people are treated fairly, procedurally, in other words, they're allowed to have a voice, they are willing to accept unequal treatment in substance. So I think part of what I would do is try to let that person who feels like they're not being heard, give them a forum, meetings to start, and then something regular for them where they can air their ideas. Now, that may be all they really need. People want recognition, want acknowledgement, want to feel important. That doesn't cost anything. Mm-hmm. So, but it has great benefits. And so rather than hide it under the table, to have some kind of a regular meeting as to what strategy is going on, whether or not their ideas are taken as is, gives them a feeling of being part of something. And I think that's about all you can do if you don't have a higher position or a number of shares. Of course, if you have a majority of shares, you can say, well, I'll vote you out. Or what I see, which is really turns out to be one of the most horrible things, is that if you have four of them, with each with 25%, you have a lot of caucuses between two of them and trying to get the third one to get against the fourth one. I mean, it's almost insidious because they team up in order to have power against the other. So having equal power is often not as good as having one having more power. But it's really, I go back to the problem before the parent decides to give the shares, is that he really needs to have, or she needs to have, a real open discussion with each of them as to what do you want? What do you want in the future? Are you willing to work in this? Do you want to? How does that work? And then they feel like they've had some role in it. But very often it's sprung after the death. They find out, oh, I got 25% of the shares, and they have had no preparation. And that's really, that's when I'm called in.
What you just said just really rings a lot of things in my mind. I know with one of my earlier episodes, I had a psychologist on the air with me, and he talked, particularly with the influence of the changing socioeconomic times, the politics, the pandemic, particularly of this most recent years, is really that, people, whether it's in the family business or in business in general, really, like you said, they want to, hear me, protect me, support me, care for me, honor me. And I think I said respect me already, but, we all want that. Those are fundamental, natural human characteristics and needs that we all want and strive to have.
Yeah, and I think they'll trump the other things, just having us, if someone gets more salary than another, that could be understood, but having no power or recognition. And that may go back to the family always treating that person as not being important.
Yeah.
And that has to be addressed. And if that's not addressed, then it will be there forever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know one of the things I found so valuable, again, whether it's family-owned business or in the workplace in general, or preparing people for dispute resolution, is actually engaging them in a little assessment about exploring their communication styles, because a lot of behaviors are tied to each of the four communication styles. We're not talking just about being assertive or aggressive or passive aggressive, but more of that driver dominant person, more of that analyzer person, more of that relationship focused person, or more of that steady innovator kind of person. And so that really brings a lot of light to bear on the dynamics of relationships. And I find family members, particularly when I do it at family-owned businesses, really, wow, that's what that's all about. So I made an assumption about where that person was coming from. So it really can sort of level the playing field in terms of understanding where people's strengths come naturally, and then what can be developed, and to not misread people's intention by judging their behavior.
Yeah, there's been some studies recently showing that a varied group of people can make better decisions than a group that is all the same or one person. And so it is, maybe that's one of the strengths of a family, is that they all are different people. And yet if they have to work together, they can often come up with better resolutions than if they just one of them will make a decision.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the saying, I may not say it exactly right, but we often judge others by their behaviors, not their motivations or intent, but we justify our behaviors by our intent.
Right. Yes, that's true.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, you mentioned generations earlier, and, certainly millennials are moving on. I think the oldest millennial now is getting ready to approach 40, if we go by some of the age brackets. But the next generation, what do you see coming out of that new crop of people moving into the work world?
Wow. First of all, they're technologically much more advanced than we are. So that has both positive and negative. I think a lot of their social skills may be online social skills as opposed to human skills. But if the world is online, that might be the place to have it, it's hard to predict, and I think probably being outside of that generation, it's even harder for me. But to say that the world is changing, it's always changing, and they are more adaptive, I think, than their parents or grandparents were. They were adaptive too, to what their changes were. But these changes in the world, I think this is the best time to live right now, because if you look at history, we've had such a variance in wealth, education, power, and now there's a lot more democratization in the world. There may still be rich and may be poor, but much less so than there was 100 years ago. And plus, I think there aren't as many, we hear about wars in Afghanistan or Middle East, but basically nothing compared to what happened in Europe between 1850 and 1950. One major industrial power after another trying to take over the other. So I think we've become smarter in that way, and using structures like the European Economic Union and the Common Market and the EU to forestall those problems by uniting in interest. And I think that's why I think if we can save it from the nut jobs, we will have a wonderful world in the future. I think probably we have to assume that there's always going to be a certain percentage of people who are crazy. What I would call, and it may be because their parents were or whatever, but we have to live with that. That's just part of it. We have to live with it and find ways to channel that. I'm very positive and enthusiastic about the next generation taking over. You see, like, just as one person, Yang, who's now running for mayor of New York, who ran for president. A bright, young Oriental guy who basically is charismatic in his own way and can move people, motivate people, has new ideas. And I think it's very different from the old school politicians. So
Yeah, I have to say, I think I share your enthusiasm for the new world ahead. And as our mutual friend Jeff Zino has said, is that, what happened in this last year, it would have taken us about 10 years to get where we are now today if it hadn't been for the pandemic, and we were forced to think outside the box and forced to do things differently. And so I think it's pretty exciting myself.
yeah, no, I think the people who own large buildings with large offices may be worried about the future, but I think everyone else is going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Richard, as we begin to wrap up for our viewers and listeners, I'd like to ask, if you could share 2 or 3 things that you would like to pass on to maybe the owners of family-owned businesses or the family members within the family-owned business, what would those 2 or 3 key tips be?
Wow. I would say advice I would give almost anyone, but one is listen to your family. Conflict is not bad. Conflict, I remember reading a book recently by John Paul Lederach, and he had a great paragraph in there about how dull life would be without conflict and change.
Yeah.
So be open to that and not resistant to it. And so listen to other people's points of view, and whether they're your children or your siblings, and know that change is not the end of the world. It's really the way to get through to the next world. That's one, listen. Also be humble, I think. Humility goes a long way. And I for a family business where everyone is being humble and has humility, they can do anything. Once they have to deal with ego trips of each other, they get stymied and get held back by that, and they're fighting little battles all the time. None of us have perfect solutions to everything. And so that would be my second tip. One is to listen, and one is to be humble. Yeah.
Well, very good. And those are pearls of wisdom that we can all apply to our lives in any walk of life. But I again, with family members, I don't know, there's just a different dynamic that comes up, and it may feel more difficult to approach that. And so it's really by having some courage too, and knowing that things won't fall apart entirely if we just stop and listen.
It's the key to everything.
Yep. Very good. Very good. Well, I want to thank you again so much, Richard, for being with us and sharing your insights and your vast world of experience in international business, your extensive background in mediation and the judging that you do, and the insights you give to conflict.
Thank you. It's been a delight talking to you. This has really been fun. So thank you.
Well, great. Thank you, Richard. And back to our viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us on Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Again, my goal is to bring you some of the best up-and-coming and emerging thought leaders to shape new worlds of thinking so that we can resolve disputes and come out with positive, productive outcomes, not just negative, destructive ones. Because it really, as Richard said, conflict isn't all negative. A lot of great things can come out of resolving conflict. And so take an opportunity to grow your world and to, the world is different. Are you ready? And this is where you can join us for more. So don't forget to subscribe so that you are notified every time a new episode is launched. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your social media network, either on Facebook or LinkedIn. And thank you for being part of the DCM community. I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc. Well, Richard Lutringer just took us through some of the dynamics that play itself out when we're talking about families and business and family-owned businesses. Well, we're going to ratchet it up just a little bit further with our next guest speaker, and you won't want to miss out on this. Bill Eddy, acclaimed speaker, author, leader in the conflict resolution industry,
a certified family law specialist who has taken his work beyond all expectations. We're going to talk about high conflict people and why do they and where do they get into conflicts? What makes them so reactive and defensive instead of solving problems? And what should we do to avoid escalating the conflict when dealing with somebody with what we call a high conflict personality, or HCP? And what alternative strategies do we want to put into play when it comes to dealing with high conflict people? We're going to dive into that. You'll learn so much from Bill as we carry out our conversation. Subscribe below. Make sure that you don't miss out on this next dynamic interview with acclaimed author and speaker, Bill Eddy.